Hi, and welcome back to a 14th section of my SwiftUI course. In this one, we're going to learn how to set a data model using different value types such as string, image, color, etc. And then we're going to use that data model to create some data so that we can loop through that data and then apply that to our UI so that we have different cards with different data. So let's scroll down at the very end and then create our data model. Let's type struct section with a capital S, colon, of type identifiable, curly braces. And then we're going to set the structure of our data starting with the ID. So var ID is equal to UUID parentheses. This is going to automatically give a unique ID to your data. So this is the basic, and the rest is going to be about your actual data. So var title of type string. Essentially, what we're setting here is what you see in each card. So we have the title, the subtitle, the logo, the image, and the background color. Next, we're going to set var text of type string. So far, this is pretty straightforward. We are replacing strings. So everything that are inside of quotes will be replaced by this data here. And this is a string, this is a string, the name of the image is a string. So let's do another one. It's going to be the logo. Again, we're going to replace the string part, which is the name of the image. So var logo of type string. Great. But what if you want to use the actual image or the actual color? Because if you use string, then you're restricted to the name of the asset. But what if you want to use one of the preset colors such as .white or even have a color literal? In that case, you want to set a different value type. So I'm going to set var image of type image. And you can find out about the value type by option clicking any of these elements. So you can see here, this is of type image. If you want to replace the whole portion of the text, so including dot or uppercase, and the element itself would be of type text. If you wanted to replace a number, for example, well, you would have to find out what kind of number that you're using. Is it a CG float, a double, etc. But let's not get too far ahead and just focus on colors, string, and image. So the last one is going to be the color itself, var color of type color. Perfect. Now I have my data model and I can create some sample data to fill this UI. So let's do let section data is equal to square brackets, so opening and closing. And this is for arrays. An array is a list of data. And for each item in my data, I'm going to use the data model. So I'm going to put section with a capital S, parentheses, and now I have the auto-completion for my data model. I can skip the ID because it's auto-generated. I can just put the title, text, logo, image, and color. For the title, let's put prototype designs in SwiftUI. For the text, 18 sections. For the logo, we're going to set the name of the logo because it's a string. So in this case, it's going to be logo1. Make sure to have the right name. So logo1 with a capital L. And for the image, this is of type image. So it's going to be an image element, parentheses, and here we're going to put the name of the image. It's going to be card1 with a capital C, just like what we have in our component. As for the color, it's the same way. So double click, parentheses with quotes, card1. Let me just isolate this section right here and put the end of the square bracket at the end. Before I show you how to use color literal and image literal here, I'm going to apply the data to my loop. So let me scroll up there and find for each. Here, there's no data. We're just looping through a certain number of items, in this case between 0 and less than 5. I can certainly change the content of my parentheses and put section data instead, which is the sample data that I just declared earlier with the array. If I was to resume this, what I should see is a single item. So now we're going to try to use the data to the component. First of all, let's jump to the component and set the data. So right before body, I'm going to declare var section of type section, which is my data model. But here's the magic. Because I'm using my data model and it has a very specific structure along with very specific value types, I'm going to be able to reference that data and replace to my component. Let's start with the title. I'm going to have to put section dot, and here it automatically detects all of the structure of my data model. In this case, it's going to be title, which is of type string, and then image, it's going to be section dot logo. Then this one, section dot text. For the image, it's the entire image. So we're going to have to replace the entire thing. So section dot image. And then for the color, it's going to be the entire color along with the parentheses, section dot color. And for the drop shadow as well. So section dot color. Now all that's left to do is to pass the actual data, because right now we have the component, we have the variable, which is of type section. We just need to pass that when we loop our data. So this component right here, we need to pass section. And the section is going to be what we get from our sample data, which is item. So item. Section data being the entire array of items if we have multiple ones. And item is each individual one. And we're passing that to our section view component, which has a variable called section. And now we're gonna scroll back to our section data, and this is where we're gonna control the data of the cards. Let me resume first. You're not gonna see any difference because we're essentially using the same data as before. But what if we were using card 2 and card 2 for the color as well? Now you're gonna see a difference. Voila. Isn't that beautiful? It's so clean, it's so clear, and the structure is all set here, and the sample data is all set here. On top of that, we can use the color, which can be one of the preset colors, such as dot black, for example. And by the way, each time you change the data, you have to resume it. And now I set it to black, and automatically it's getting the shadow, which is using the section color, so both are automatically changed. You can also use color literal, which is what I've shown in a previous session. To do that, we have to do parentheses, and then for whatever reason, auto-completion doesn't work for color literal here. So we're gonna have to get creative and type color lit outside of everything. So if you do that, you're gonna find this embed color, which you can cut, so Command X, and paste inside the parentheses. Let me set one of the preset colors like this, and if I resume, you're gonna see that I have my custom color, which is a color literal. So this is super useful for prototyping, because when you prototype, you wanna be able to change the colors super easily. And I found this to be really fun. Instead of having to go to the assets catalog and edit the hex value and then set the name manually for my color, which is still a great workflow, but what I found is that it's mostly useful at the end of creating your app, where you want it to be adaptive, to have a dark mode and all the options that comes with the assets catalog. But for prototyping, this is perfect. It's so fast, it's really easy, and using the color picker is just an amazing way for designers and developers to quickly arrange the color, set the hex value, the opacity, or one of the favorite colors. But I also want to show you that you can use image literal. It's exactly the same way as a color literal, which means that instead of embedding a color to the code, it's going to be embedding an image to the code. It's a bit more tricky though. You're going to have to replace the double quotes and put UI image. So UI in lowercase, image with a capital I. And you can just use the autocompletion, and now it's going to be of type UI image. Again, the autocompletion for image literal does not work in this data here, but it's going to work in your view. So what I'm going to do is use the same creative technique, which is to type image lit and double click here. So this is my embedded image, and I can pick any image that I want from my assets catalog. For example, this image. And here, all I need to do is to cut the image and replace that with the UI image like this. Boom. Just like that, you have an embedded image. You can quickly switch between those images, and when you resume, you're going to see that it's going to apply to the card. Voila. And now I can just add more data. So I'm going to select all of the section and then copy this. Make sure that you put a comma between each item. So I'm going to put a comma after this one, paste another section, another comma, paste another section. So I'm going to quickly change the content. So feel free to use whatever text you want. I'm going to put build a SwiftUI app. It's going to be 20 sections, and I'm going to change to another image such as this one, and SwiftUI Advanced, 20 sections again. Set a different image, and finally I can change the colors really quickly. Again, every time you edit the data, you have to resume. And voila, I have 3 cards now instead of 1, and it's dynamically taking from my sample data, which is named section data. It's automatically filling the correct section value with the right value type, and it's just beautiful. It makes prototyping and creating an app so easy. So I hope you enjoyed this session, and feel free to use your own data, your own colors, your own images. In the next session, we're going to learn how to apply a 3D transformation on these cards as you scroll by using Geometry Reader. I'll see you then. Hey, and welcome to the 15th section of the SwiftUI course. This is going to be a fun one because we're going to learn how to detect the position of the card as we scroll. And using that position, we're going to be able to apply a 3D transformation to our card. So in order to detect the position of our card, we're going to have to go to the section view. Let me use their insanely useful embed function. So command click section view, and let's say HStack, it doesn't matter. We're going to replace HStack by Geometry Reader. And the Geometry Reader will give us some values. So right after the opening of the curly braces, we're going to put geometry, which is the name of the value that we're getting, in. By default, you're going to see that it's not very good at detecting the size of the content. You're going to have to set a frame which is equivalent to the size of the section view component. We're going to put dot frame parentheses width 275 comma height 275, This is the exact same values that we have for the section view component. So this value that we're getting is really interesting. When you wrap against any element, it's going to be able to give you a bunch of useful information, such as the width, the height, the top left position, top right, bottom left, bottom right. And since we're wrapping each card, we're going to be able to use those values for each card and apply to any modifier. So let's do exactly that. We're going to use a fun one. So Command Shift L to go to modifier, type 3D, and let's select rotation 3D. Right now, it's just applying a 90 degrees angle to every one of them. It's kind of strange looking. So what we're gonna try to do is to replace this degree by the data that we're getting from Geometry Reader. So there's a lot of code here. I'm going to isolate the number 90. Let me replace 90 by geometry. So that's the value that we're getting here. And I'm going to put dot frame parentheses in colon dot global. So this is going to get the frame value from my card. What's cool with the frame value is that you're gonna get the position but also the size of it. So I can just decide to get the left position, which is dot min x. Now here it's going to complain because typically the frame values are CG float, but for degrees we're using double. And I can read the error message. It says exactly that. It's trying to convert CG float and it's expecting a double. So it's going to try to fix it, and in this case it's pretty straightforward. SwiftUI is going to be able to fix it. So it's just gonna wrap the value inside a double. So this is going to convert a CG float to a double. Okay, so let's test this. Boom. Look at this animation. It's so crazy. So I can decide to make it less sharp by dividing the number. So let's do /. So we're dividing by 20. Now you're gonna see that it's a lot nicer. And we can play with the axes. We can decide to disable the z-axis, for example, and it's going to look like this. We can disable one of the axes for x or y. If we set y to 0, you're gonna see that it's changing a vertical angle. We can set y to 10, but x to 0. And this is the effect that I'm actually looking for. Now you can create the opposite angle by doing -20 instead of 20. So now it's going to face the other way. So let me explain a little bit. The value that we're getting from the frame of geometry, the min x specifically, is here 30. So we're starting at number 30, we're dividing that by 20, and we're applying that number to the degrees. We can of course use max x, min y, max y, and the width. But the width is not going to change because the width is the size of the frame and it's not changing. Versus min x is the position to the left, and as you scroll, that position changes. So it's like here. And that number, as it changes, we're dividing it by -20 and it's applying to the angle. If we don't want to have a starting angle, in this case it's 30, we're going to have to remove that offset of 30 by doing -30. And now the number here would be 0 divided by -20, and therefore no angle at the beginning. So make sure to put the -30 offset inside the parentheses, and using the final number we can divide that by -20 to set the direction and also how sharp you want your angle to move. And also because we're applying an angle, it's adding more space between the cards. So we can actually change the spacing to 20 instead of 30. Sometimes when changing some values, such as the spacing, it's going to bug a little bit, so you're gonna have to restart the preview. So this is what I have, and as you can imagine, this is really powerful. If you were to have a vertical scroll, you would totally use min Y instead of min X. And you would use exactly this technique to create either a parallax effect or a sticky header, for example. But don't worry, we're gonna learn those things in a later section in this course. So that's the fun little thing I wanted to show you today. In the next session, I wanna add another button, and we're gonna try to summon a built-in iOS 13 modal presentation. It has some really neat built-in gesture and cards that sit on top of each other. It's going to be really useful for your app. So I'll see you in the next session. Hey again, welcome to the 16th session of the SwiftUI course. Today we're going to create a new button here, which is going to summon a new view, but this time we're going to use the built-in modal presentation. So let's start by creating a new button after the avatar view. I'm going to do Shift, Command, and L to go to the views to find the button. And instead of using a text, I'm going to delete and replace that by image. And the image is going to use a system, so one of the SF symbols. The name for it is going to be bell. First of all, let's set the styling of the SF symbol. By default, we have a tint which is blue, so to remove that, we're gonna have to set a modifier called rendering mode. Set that to .original. By default, it's going to be black. And then we're going to set the size and the weight by using the font modifier. And it's going to be .system using size, weight, and design. The size is going to be 16. The weight is going to be .medium. And we can just delete the design part. So now we have the button with the image inside. We're going to add a frame to our image, and the width is going to be 36. The height is going to be 36 as well. Before we do the rest of the styling for our button, let me show you how to create that modal presentation. The first thing is to set a state. We're going to create a state. So state var show update is equal to false by default. Then we're going to use the button event to toggle between true and false. So self.showUpdate.toggle. Finally, for the button, we're gonna have to use a new modifier called .sheet. And sheet has the option for is presented, binding bool, and then the content. So we're gonna select this one. Make sure to have is presented. And for the binding, we're gonna use $show_update. For the content, we can make it shorter by deleting content and just keeping the parentheses and then put curly braces at the end. Within these curly braces, I can just put whatever view that I want to summon. I wanted to show a new view called updates, but in this case, it's not created yet. So I'm gonna put something that already exists. So let's use content view parentheses. So that's it. We can resume and then we can test the button. Let's click the bell button. And now you can see that this is the built-in UI that comes with iOS 13. And this portion here can be any view. And this animation is all built in. Additionally, we have the built-in gesture as well as the animation that comes with that gesture. So like this, you can just dismiss it. Now, keep in mind that this UI here is supposed to be for quick information, and the gesture can be in the way. So in this example here, I was supposed to be able to use a gesture on my cards, but it is conflicting with the built-in gesture. So the content view is not the best example for using the modal presentation. We're gonna create a new one called updates. But the modal presentation is really neat. Why? Because you don't need to have a navigation view, for example, and you don't need to create a dismiss interaction, because the user will know that with this UI, you're supposed to be able to dismiss it like this. That interaction is everywhere in iOS 13. All right, so let's finish our button styling here. I'm gonna go back to my image, which is the SF symbol, and I'm going to add a background. So right after frame, I'm going to put dot background, set color dot white. Of course, it's not going to be visible, so I'm going to have to add a drop shadow. So dot shadow, and I'm going to create something custom using color dot black, using opacity parentheses 0.1, and the radius is going to be 1 x0 y1. So if you look at the design, it's not uncommon to have double drop shadows. Just like in real life, you can have two sources of light, and that's why you would have double drop shadows. One that has a sharper shape and the other one is more spread out. So I just created the first one and I'm going to create the second one. So dot shadow, again, this one is custom as well. Color dot black dot opacity. This one is going to be 0.2. The radius is going to be 10 x0 y10. So that's a really neat drop shadow, and what I can do here is to clip it to a circle shape. I'm going to have to do that before the drop shadow because the drop shadow has to be applied after we clip the shape. So right after background, I'm going to type dot clip shape circle parentheses. Let me just fix the indentation. So that's it. That's how you create a modal presentation. You set the state and then you change the state from an event, and then you add a sheet modifier by binding the state. So using a $sign and then summoning any view that you want. In the next session, we're going to learn how to create a navigation view, and that's going to be our updates page. It's going to have a really neat list layout that you can find in settings, for example, and we're going to be able to customize the list rows as well as the title and a bunch of other things. So I'll see you in the next session. Hi, and welcome to the 17th section of the SwiftUI course. Today we're going to learn how to build a layout using the built-in navigation view. This is a list layout that is extremely common in iOS, where you can easily customize the large title, each row, as well as the controls on the top left and top right. So this new screen will be connected using modal presentation from this button. But first, we're going to create that new file. So let me enable the navigator command 0, and I'm going to right click on the menu view, click on new file, SwiftUI view, next, and I'm going to name this one update list, create. So when you're using a list layout inside the navigation view, you can name it as a list and it's pretty clear. So let me disable the navigator and I'm going to resume. So this is what we have so far. What I'm going to do here, I'm going to delete the text element and replace this with the navigation view. So I'm going to do Command-Shift-L to search for navigation. And here you can find the navigation view. So double click on this one. So when inserting a navigation view, you're going to find the wrapper for the navigation view. This is really important if you want to have that header and also that navigation to detail screens so that you can swipe back from the edge on the left. And then we have the navigation link, which is kind of like a button, but it only works within the navigation view. So let's try that. The destination can be any element such as text and parentheses. I'm going to put, let's say, 1. For the content, let me press enter and put inside its own line. And I'm going to put text SwiftUI. So this is my content. It is being wrapped inside a navigation link, which means that I'm going to be able to click here to go to a detail screen. Let me just fix the indentation here and let's play the preview. And when you click here, you see that it transitioned to the detail screen and we have access to the back button, but also we can swipe from the edge of the phone, just like the default behavior in iOS. So all this comes with the navigation view and the navigation link. Now, if you want to have a list layout, you're going to have to command click the navigation link and embed in list. So just like that, you're able to have 5 rows that are clickable to the destination. If you want to add a large title, you're going to have to go to list and add a modifier to it. So dot navigation bar title and set text parentheses double quotes and set the title, so updates. Thanks to the large title, it's going to transition to the detail screen as well. Let me indent this and then we can take care of the data. Right now this is empty, and as we've learned before, we're going to create a data model for the design. So we have image, title, text, and date. So I'm going to go at the bottom of the page and declare struct update of type identifiable, curly braces, var ID to auto generate the ID, so is equal to UUID parentheses. And then we're going to add the missing 4 variables. So var image of type string, var title of type string, var text of type string, var date of type string. Now we're going to set the sample data. So let update data is equal to square brackets. And for each line, I'm going to get the data model. So update parentheses, and I'm going to select the option without the ID. And here I'm going to input some sample data. The first one being card1 for image. The title, let's put SwiftUI. For the text, it's going to be, let's say, just text for now. And date, let's put Jan 1. So now instead of using some fake data, we're going to use our sample data. So instead of using 0 to less than 5, we're going to use update data. As for the name of the variable, we can decide to be more specific. So instead of saying item, we can say update. As for the content of the text, since we have a string from update, we're going to put and replace the string here and do update.title. Finally, we also have the text in terms of data. So we can use that to replace the content of the destination and type update.text. Alright, so what this should do is give us one row, which is the data that we have here, and replace each row with this data. So I'm going to resume, and voila, we have the title for each row. And when we click, it should show the text, which is the content of the text that we passed right here. So now what we can do is to input our own data, or you can just copy and paste from the text content in the course. And I have 5 sample items. So there we go. So now if I resume with 5 items, I should be able to see the new data that I just inputted. Make sure that each line is separated by a comma. And so you can just customize the card, the title, the text to any content that you want. Like this, I'm able to navigate to each detail view with their own content based on this data right here. So now let's deal with the styling and see how customizable each row is. So we're gonna go here, which is just a text element for now. For the text, I'm gonna set font.system, and I'm gonna use the 3 values. So size is going to be 20, weight is going to be bold, and for the design, I can just delete it because I don't need it. Then I'm gonna add a second text element underneath. So I'm gonna have to use a VStack. So embed in VStack, and I'm gonna bring a new text element. So text, parentheses, type update.text. Now I'm gonna make sure that everything is aligned to the left. You can also command click on the VStack and go to the inspector to change the alignment from here. And it's going to align all the elements to the left against each other. For the number of lines, you can even restrict to, let's say, 2 lines instead of 3. So now I can just add a modifier called line limit and set it to 2. This will add the triple dots at the end if it goes beyond 2 lines. Let me indent this, and I'm going to add a new modifier for font. Set it to sub headline. For the color, I'm going to set foreground color, set color parentheses, and I'm going to use the color literal. So color lit, and auto select this one. We can select, let's say, the second gray from the right, like this one. After this, I'm also going to add a new text for the date. So text update.date. I'm going to set the font parentheses to dot caption for the style. Let's do dot font weight to dot bold. And for the color, I'm gonna set the foreground color to secondary, so it's dot secondary. Now please note that the color presets that we have, such as dot white, dot black, well, you also have access to accent color, primary, and secondary. What is the difference? Well, those colors are actually adapted to dark mode. And that is something that we're going to learn later on. So the text elements inside each row don't have enough padding. So what I can do here is to go to the VStack, command click on the VStack, go to inspector, and I can add a spacing, let's say of 8. And make sure to press enter so that it applies. So you can see that it applied spacing of 8.0. Now I want to add an image to the left side of my VStack. So I'm going to embed the VStack inside an HStack first. And before the VStack, I'm going to add my image. So image, parentheses, and I'm going to put update.image. Since it's a string, it's going to call the image name. Since the image is too big, I'm going to have to add dot resizable. Also set dot aspect ratio to dot fit. I'm going to make it even smaller, so dot frame, set it to width of 80 and height of 80. Why not add a background? So dot background, set color dot black. Also add a corner radius, so dot corner radius of 20. And finally, set some padding. This padding should only be to the right side. So we're gonna put dot trailing, comma, and let's just put 4. Another small detail that we can fix is add a bit of padding from the top and bottom of each row. So for the HStack, make sure you're selecting the right end of the curly brace for the HStack, and I'm gonna put dot padding, parentheses, dot vertical, so it's going to apply top and bottom, comma, of 8. So as you can see, each row is really customizable using the same techniques as you would for a custom layout. In the next session, we're going to build that detail screen and pass data from the current navigation view. So I'll see you in the next session. Hey, and welcome back to the 18th section of the SwiftUI course. Today, we're going to create a detail screen so that we don't just pass this text here. It's going to be a new view. And on top of that, we're going to pass a bunch of variables such as the image, the title, the text. So let's start by going to the navigator, and we're going to right-click Update List, create a SwiftUI view, and we're going to name that Update Detail, and then finish. Let me minimize the navigator. So in this detail screen, let's start with passing the variable. Right before body, I'm going to type var update of type update, which is our data model. I can also set a default, otherwise this preview is going to be complaining. So I'm gonna set update data, and since update data is an array, I'm going to call the first item within that array by putting square brackets and referencing to the index. In this case, let's set to 0, which means the first item inside that array. So now we can resume this and we can replace the content of our text by putting update.text. I'm also going to put an image above the text, so I'm going to need a VStack. Right before the text, I'm going to put image, parentheses, and type update.image. So now let's talk about the large title, because we have two options. One is to create a custom large title and put that as a text, or the other one is to set the navigation view title, which is the better option because it's going to be scrolled and transitioned to the navigation view, and it's just far more adaptive when it comes to using a navigation view. So in order to do that, we're going to have to add a modifier called .navigationBarTitle and put the title as update.title. Now keep in mind that this title that we just set up is not going to be visible here, because this is dependent on the navigation view wrapper. So I'm gonna need to go to update list, and this is where I'm connecting to the update detail, but right now it's not connected yet. It's just summoning a text. So I'm going to replace this destination. Instead of text, I'm going to set update detail, parentheses. When this is set up and I go to the detail view, you can see that the title is appearing and there's no scrolling. You won't see the transition to the nav bar. So we're gonna have to add some scrolling, especially when you have a lot of content, which is most of the case. But the thing is, we want to be able to preview this update list page all the time because that's where the root or our navigation is. So one thing you can do is to click on this little pin here, which allows you to stick to this preview regardless of what page you're editing the code. So I click on this little pin and then I go to update detail, and this preview will be still from the update list.swift. Now if I preview my app, I'm gonna see that it's always about SwiftUI Advanced. That's because it's always using the default value. We haven't really passed a custom value. So we're gonna go back to update list, and instead of not passing any variable, we're gonna pass the update. So update colon and pass the value that we get from the array, which is update. Like this, if I click on Webflow, it's gonna show Webflow and the image as well as the text for Webflow. And the same from Protopie, SwiftUI, and Framer. Let me add some scrolling. So I'm gonna go to update detail and I'm going to select the VStack and embed, let's say in VStack, replace the VStack by a scroll view. With this, I'm going to be able to scroll my content, and when I scroll, the title transitions to the nav bar. Another thing I can do is to replace the scroll view by a list instead. And this will allow me to have the style of the list, which is separated by these lines. And it comes with the scroll as well, just like a scroll view. And on top of that, you can customize the list style. So I can add a modifier called .listStyle. And here we have a few options. We have default list style, parentheses, and this is the default one. And then we also have the group list style. And this is where you're gonna find that the content itself is white, but the background is off-white. There's also the plain list style, but from what I understand, it's exactly like the default style. Before we finish, I just want to fix a few alignment inconsistencies here. You're going to find that visible in the ProtoPie one. So you can see that this text does not seem to be aligned to the left, and that's because our image here is not consistent in terms of size. To debug this, I found that it's much easier to not use the live preview and also to disable the pin. So like this, you can see the frame that is blue, and you can see the problems right away when you select the element. First of all, let's set a consistent frame for our image. This is going to help a lot. So we're gonna set frame, parentheses. We're gonna set a max width of .infinity. We're also gonna make the image resizable. So right before .frame, we're gonna put .resizable. And let's make the aspect ratio to .fit. So this is a lot better, and let's make sure that it works for the other update data as well. So let me switch to the ProtoPie one, so number 2, and resume. Again, this is strictly for previewing. That's why we have the default data. So let's test here, which seems to be fine as well. So I'm gonna test the second one, so number 1. And now we have a problem. This is not aligning, this is not taking the correct size for the bounding box of the text. And this is a common problem you're gonna run into when you use multi-line text. Depending on the amount of text that you have per line, it's going to have its own size for the frame. So to fix that, you can set a frame with a max width of .infinity. And this is going to ensure that we always have a full width for the bounding box. But the problem is, by default, it aligns the text to the center. So we're gonna set the comma alignment to leading instead. So we can do a final test by going back to update list and then play. So you can see that it's a lot more consistent now. When I go to Webflow, it seems to be aligning well. ProtoPie, SwiftUI, and Framer. So I hope you found this little session useful. We managed to create a beautiful detail screen that is perfectly adapted to the navigation view along with the scrolling, and we managed to pass data. In the next session, I want to show you how to use Combine to edit your data that is part of your array. And thanks to that, we're going to look at some built-in functions such as swipe to delete, edit mode, reordering using drag. It's going to be really simple thanks to SwiftUI. So I'll see you in the next session. Hi, we are at the 19th session of my SwiftUI course, and today we're going to learn about Combine. If you scroll down from the update list, you're going to find that this is our data. Now this is great for reading, but if you want to edit the data and update it to every single view that is using that data in real time, you will be needing combine. So we're gonna need that in order to provide some of the features such as swipe to delete, edit mode, reorder the list, and adding new items to our array. What's cool about combine is that we're still gonna use the data model and the data sample. We just need to put that data into what we call a store. So let's create a new file for that. I'm going to right-click update detail, create a new file, and SwiftUI view. I'm going to name this one update store, create. So I'm going to minimize my navigator. I'm going to delete the content of the file, and here I'm going to import combine as well. So to create my store, I'm going to create a class called update store of type observable object and curly braces. And I'm gonna make sure that my data is going to be constantly updated by using a published. So commercial A published var updates of type array update, which is our data model. And we're gonna have some default data, which is the sample data that we have created. And that is update data. And that's it. This is our store, and we're gonna be able to use this store from any view. So I'm gonna jump to update list, and I'm going to scroll back to the top, and I'm gonna start using that store. So right before body, I'm going to type commercial A observe object, so not observable object, but observed object, var store is equal to update store, which is the class that we just created. Currently, we're using the static data from the bottom of the page, but instead of doing that, I'm going to use exactly the same data, but this time is a store that contains that data. So I'm gonna put store.updates. And just like that, I'm using the same data, but this time it's updated and can be manipulated in real time. So let me resume. You're gonna see exactly the same data, and there you go. There's nothing that changed. So now I'm going to start creating a function that's going to allow me to add a new field on top of the existing data. So before body, I'm going to type func add update parentheses curly braces. This is a simple function that can be called from anywhere. And in this function, we're going to do store.updates. So that's our combined data. And we're gonna append a new element. Append is available when the value type is an array. And so we're gonna add a new item to the array. And it's going to be using the data model update parentheses. And we're going to use the one without the ID. And let's just put some placeholder text. For the image, let's say it's going to be card 1. The title is going to be new item. The text, let's say text, and date Jan 1. Okay, so once we have this, we can run this function from somewhere. What we can do, since it's a navigation view, we can add buttons at the top left and at the top right. In order to do that, I'm going to add right after navigation bar title, it's going to be dot navigation bar items. And instead of view, I'm going to do Command Shift L to insert a button. If I resume this, you're gonna see a new button text right at the top left. Let me change the text to add update. And then for the action, since I'm using a function, I don't need the curly braces. I'm just gonna put add update, which is my function. So now let's see if that works. I'm going to click add update, and voila, magically I just inserted a new item with exactly the data that I just set. That's just really cool. I didn't have to do anything more than this. And the data is being injected in real time and seen right after we click Add Update. Let me fix the indentation here. So now I'm going to use the built-in function for swipe to delete. But the thing is, I cannot use it in a list. I have to use it in a for each. So you can see here, the list is not only taking care of the styling of the list, but it's also taking care of repeating the data. Unfortunately, we're going to have to change that a little bit. So what we need to do here is to select everything right after list and cut that and only put curly brace. And I'm going to command click navigation link and use repeat instead. Now this is going to do my repeat data, and I'm going to paste back that data right after for each, like this. So for each, parentheses, getting my data from store.updates, and then I'm getting the value update. Like this, my list is a simple wrapper strictly for the styling. And I'm doing the looping by using for each instead. And the rest is the same, which is looping through the store.update and getting the value update. And if I resume this, it should do exactly the same thing. And thanks to that, this curly brace, which ends right here, can now use one of the built-in function for swipe to delete. And all you need to do is to add a new modifier called .onDelete and select that. Here I don't really need to use anything between the parentheses and the parentheses. I can just put curly braces right after. And this onDelete modifier gives me some value. So I'm going to put index in. So the value is in index. Using that value, I'm going to delete from my store. So self.store.updates.remove at, since we're using an array, remove is available, and I can just put index.first, and it has to have exclamation point. So in Swift, sometimes values are optional, meaning that they may or may not have values. And because our function absolutely requires something that is not optional, we are forcing that value to be non-optional by using this exclamation point. But don't worry if you don't understand it. This we'll dive deeper in the future. For now, let's just appreciate the fact that we can swipe to delete. Look at that. And I can delete it, and it's just disappeared from my data. So the last thing I want to show you today is the edit mode. And we're going to need to add a new button to the top right for the edit mode. So you can see here, navigation bar items has leading. Leading means left. We can also add trailing. So you can see that this is our button. So right after the end of the curly braces, I'm going to add comma, and I'm going to type trailing colon, and I'm going to do edit button parentheses. This edit button is written exactly like this, and it's available in SwiftUI without having to create anything. What it allows us to do is to click on the edit button, and suddenly we have access to the functions that are available. So right now we only have the ability to delete. So that's it. But let's add a new function, and we're gonna do that right after .onDelete. Let me add a new modifier, .onMove, and instead of using the parentheses, I'm going to delete it, curly braces, and here I'm gonna receive multiple values. So I can actually use parentheses and source colon, index set, which is the type, and then the destination colon of type integer, so int. And at the end, always put the in. So instead of receiving a single value, we're receiving multiple values within a parentheses. The first one being source and the second one being destination. And now I'm going to manipulate my data. So self.store.updates, and I'm going to use .move parentheses. Select from the auto completion. Now we need to fill two pieces of data from offset to offset. The first one is going to be source, which is the data we got here, and the second one is going to be destination. So now I'm going to click on edit, and magically you're going to see a new option, which is 3 lines, and this allows you to drag the items. So I'm going to drag it, and it allows me to move, and when I drop, it automatically updates the order. So let me do that again for Framer, and voila, you can see that we have the ability to reorder now. On top of that, we have the ability to delete and the ability to add more items. And all this is happening in real time. It's really powerful. So I hope you're starting to see how much you can do with SwiftUI in just a few lines of code. Before we end the session, I'm gonna go to Home View, and I'm gonna change the modal presentation for this button. And instead of calling Content View, I'm going to call Update List. Like this, you're gonna see that in our updates modal presentation, I have access to all of the options, but instead of using a full view, I'm using the iOS 13 modal presentation. And you can see that the layout is well adapted to that new presentation. And all the functions are fully working as well. In the next session, I want to show you how to use the previews and how to test your app on your actual device. So I'll see you in the next session. Hi, and welcome to the 20th session of my SwiftUI course. Today we're going to learn how to create quickly a tab bar, and then we're going to learn how to use the previews, how to test on the iOS simulator, and also on your device. So this is the final session of part 1, and I want to be able to access to all of the pages that we have created so far, including the content view, which is why we're going to use the tab bar to access that for now. So the tab bar is highly recommended for iOS design. Why? Because it's really easy to access from the thumb, and now it's favored to have most of the interactions at the bottom of the screen. If you notice, since the iPhone 10 with the swipe up to go back home, well, most of the interactions are at the bottom of the screen, including the modals, the share, they all animate from the bottom. If you want your users to discover quickly and easily the content of your app, you want to put the menu at the bottom of the screen and for it to be easily reachable and always visible. For secondary options that don't need to be used very often, such as the profile or the updates, then it's okay to put at the top of the screen. So let's go to the navigator and then create a new file after Update Store. So right click on Update Store, new file, new SwiftUI view. We're gonna name that tab bar. Let me disable the navigator, and now I need to wrap my content inside a tab view. So I'm going to command click and use embed for anything such as VStack, for example, and I'm going to replace the VStack by tab view. And for the content itself, I'm going to replace the text and just summon home parentheses. This is going to show my content inside the tab view, and you can already see the tab bar appearing. Now for the tab view, you might want to disable the save area at the top, so we can add a modifier called .edge ignore save area, and we're only going to ignore the top portion. Next, we're going to use the home, and then we're going to add a new modifier so that we can turn that into a tab bar item. So right after home parentheses, we're going to add dot tab item curly braces. Within the curly braces, we're going to put a text parentheses and then just put the name of my menu item. So it's going to be home. So you can already see home as part of that menu. Next, I want to put an icon. So I'm going to use SF symbol right before the text, and I'm going to type image parentheses system, and I'm going to use system name, and this is going to be the name of the icon. So play.circle.fill. So that's all you needed to do to create a tab bar with an item using one of the 1000 icons from SF symbol, which is pretty cool. And then I'm going to add a new tab bar item. This time I'm going to summon the content view, which has the certificates, and then add dot tab item curly braces. I'm going to start with the image this time, system name, and I'm going to use rectangle.stack.fill, and then end of quotes. For the text, I'm going to set a text parentheses quotes, then I'm going to put certificates. So the menu should be working now. I'm going to preview, and then I can switch between the two tabs like this. And they're all fully interactive, including the menu and the cards being draggable with all the things that we have learned since the beginning. Okay, so let's talk about previews, because we have many options and they're really neat. So for example, you can decide to preview on a specific device by adding a modifier to the tab bar parentheses here. So dot preview device, and here I'm gonna set quotes and put iPhone 8. Obviously we haven't completely updated our app to the iPad or to the phone without the notch, which is something we're gonna learn later on, but I just wanted to show that it is possible to quickly switch between the devices, and you can see that it works pretty well, although it's not perfect. You can also preview on multiple devices at the same time, but this does not work if you have the live preview though. So you're gonna have to stop the live preview, and then I'm going to command click the tab bar and put that inside a group first. And from here I can just copy the entire line and paste, and now I have two devices that I'm previewing to. So I can use, for example, iPhone 11 Pro Max, and it's gonna show me how it's gonna look like on both devices at the same time. By the way, if you want to know the list of devices, you can option click preview device, and then you're gonna find the list right here. We have a pretty sizable list. Now, if you want to test on the iOS simulator, all you need to do is to select the device that you want to test it on, such as iPhone 11 Pro, and then click on play. This may take a minute or so. Once you have that run, you're gonna see the content view by default, and you're gonna have to set the initial screen to something else. And in order to do that, we're gonna have to open the navigator and go to scene delegate, and here where it says let content view is equal to content view, we're gonna change content view with, let's say, tab bar instead. So this is going to use the tab bar as the initial screen. So you can command R to run the app again, and it's going to run the tab bar as the initial screen. If you want to be able to test on your device, you're gonna have to create an account using your Apple ID. And last time I checked, if you're not publishing to the App Store, this part should be free. Once you have an account, you can click on the project. This is where you can change the display name that appears next to the app icon. So for example, if I want to add a plus between design and code, it's going to appear like this next to my app icon. I'm going to go to signing and capability, and here I need to set a theme. And if you haven't logged in yet, you're gonna have to click on add an account. And this is where you're gonna log in to your Apple ID. Once you have an account, you're gonna select that, and this is going to allow you to test on your device. But first, you're gonna need to connect your Mac to your phone via USB. And once that's done, you're gonna see your device in this list, and you're gonna be able to run on your device. All right, so this is what we've learned so far in part 1 of the course. I hope you had a lot of fun creating this UI here, where you learn a lot about animations, about gestures, about layout, and then we move on to create a very custom animated menu with SF symbols and fun tricks like color literal, image literal, as well as the drag progress. And then we learn how to create these cards with repeat data and some really cool 3D effect on the scrolling. And finally, we learn how to create a list layout with a navigation view and a beautiful transition, as well as some really cool built-in behaviors such as delete, add update, edit mode, reorder, using combine so that everything happens in real time. This is the end of part 1, and it's definitely not the end of everything, because we have a massive part 2 that is coming, where I'm gonna take your skills to the next level. We're gonna learn about API data, more animations, fully custom transitions, how to create a login and connect to Firebase, how to create a CMS. It's going to be a ton of fun. I really hope to see you in the part 2 of the course. See you then. Hi, my name is Meng, and welcome to the 21st session of the SwiftUI course. This is the start of part 2. In part 1, we learn how to create this UI from scratch, and we learned quite a bit about animation, gestures, how to compose our UI. In part 2, we're gonna dive deeper, starting with the ring animation right here. We're gonna create a component that is fully customizable, and then we're gonna reuse that and scale it. Then we're gonna learn something really awesome, which is how to create a very custom transition to this screen right here using a really nice dismiss gesture. This is all taking into consideration the data, the scroll position, as well as new animation techniques. So we're gonna learn about API calls, and we're also gonna build a login screen where you're gonna create a 3D parallax effect like this one with animation that is looping in the background. And we're gonna have some keyboard interactions, which allows you to position the screen based on if it's enabled or disabled. And so we can start typing and set the password and then log in. This is going to create a loading animation and a success Lottie animation, which is an animated asset which you can create in After Effects. This is also making an API call to Firebase. So we're gonna learn that in the last part of the course. Once you're logged in, you can now access to the menu, which is the UI that you have created earlier. We will also adapt our UI for dark mode, not just for the colors, but also the images and all the screens that we have created so far. With all the techniques, we'll get to support the bigger screens such as the iPad and create different transitions based on the size of the screen. As always, there are so many little tips and tricks in between in terms of not just developing, but also layout and workflow. With that said, let's resume from where we left off at the end of part 1. If you haven't done part 1, I strongly suggest that you do that first, even if you have done the first iteration of this course, because there were many updates to the flow. Also, at any point, please use the source files to check the code against yours so that you always have the most up-to-date code. Also, I included the final project files for those who are curious about how I built that app. Alright, so let's start part 2 with something super light, which is how to create this ring UI here. Please make sure to have all the assets files downloaded. In those files, you'll find the starting template for each of the section of the course. Let's start from the content view.swift, and here we're going to create a new file from the navigator. So right click on content view, click on new file, SwiftUI view, next, and then we're going to name this one ring view, create. Let's hide the navigator and then resume so we can start on the UI. So we're going to try to create that ring from scratch. Instead of using a text, we're going to use a circle parentheses. Then to draw only the border, we're going to use a modifier called .stroke. While you type this, you're going to see a bunch of options such as content, style. So the content is basically the color or gradient, and the style can be the line width, line cap, dash, all the options that you can find in the design tool. Let's select the first option, which is the content. We can always add the stroke style later. So the shape style can be a color or a gradient. Let's start with a color. So color.red. And then I'm going to add the style. So comma, style, and then stroke style. This one. Parentheses. And here we have a bunch of options. So let's select the second option and play with a bunch of them, such as the line width, for example. Let's set to 5. For the line cap, I'm going to set dot round. The line join dot round as well. I'm not sure what is the meter limit, but I'm going to set it to dot infinity for now. For the dash, the value is an array with a CG float. And what this means is that you can have multiple values inside the brackets. So we can set to, let's say, 20, 20. For the dash phase, I'm going to set to 0. All right, so let me explain a little bit more. The line width is pretty straightforward. That's the width of the line. The line cap is set to round, but that's only going to be visible when you have a gap between the dash, or when you have some trimming going on. Let me switch to the design tool, and here we're gonna try to recreate the same circle, and we're gonna look at the options for border. So let me remove the fill and set to width of 5, and you can see here we have the same options for the line cap, the joins, as well as the dash. And the line cap will only be visible when you have the dash. So let's set to 2020, like what we have in Xcode. And now we can set the ends to rounded, but I think that in Xcode, the border is set to center and not inside. So this looks like roughly what we have in Xcode. And you can play with the different values and translate that to Xcode. But I just wanted to explain to you that the design tool and Xcode are following roughly the same conventions. So feel free to play with these values. For now, I'm just gonna set it to 20, 0 so that we have a plain line. When we have a lot of code like this, usually it's best to isolate the values so that we can do the gradient and not get too confused. So I'm gonna set the color on its own line, the style as well, and the parentheses ending here. Now let's go ahead and replace the color by a gradient instead. I'm going to delete color.red and summon a gradient. So linear gradient, and here I have a bunch of values. Let's double click on the gradient. So here we have an array of 2 colors. And for each color, we can use color literal, which is expressed by doing color parentheses. Inside the parentheses, color lit, and we can just double click on this one. The same for the second color, color parentheses, color lit, and double click on the autocomplete. Here, I can just select the first color and then the second color. Feel free to pick whatever color you fancy. Now we're gonna set the start point. And this can be from any point, like top left, top right, etc. So we're gonna put a dot, and again, autocompletion is your best friend. So we can set top trailing, which would be top right, to bottom leading, which is bottom left. So you can see that our linear gradient is being applied to the stroke, starting with the red color at top right and the purple color at bottom left. Now to create that progress ring, we're going to have to add a new modifier before stroke. It's going to be .trim. And trim has from value, which is a CG float, which is a number, and to value, again, another CG float. From is going to be 0.2 and 2 is going to be 1. So you can already see that my circle has a bit of a gap thanks to the trimming. These values are a little bit weird because 0.2 represent 80%. So if I set 0.1, I would be at 90% progress if this is the starting point. Now I want to do a bit of rotation and symmetry, and I'm going to have to use those effects. Let's start with the rotation. I'm going to do that right after stroke. Let me just set the indentation here. Dot rotation effect. I'm gonna set an angle with the degrees, and I'm gonna set it to 90 degrees. So you can see that instead of starting here, it starts here because we rotate it by 90 degrees. Now we're gonna try to do a symmetry so that it starts here and move the opposite direction. In order to do that, we're gonna use a rotation 3D effect. We're gonna set the angle, parentheses, to a degree of 180 and set the axes of 1 for x, y 0, and z 0. Perfect. Now I'm going to set my indentation, and you're noticing that we're starting from here to here at 90%. If I was to set, let's say 0.5, it would stop here, or 0.9, I would be at 10% from here to here. So I'm gonna put back to 0.2, which is 80% from here to here. I'm going to set the frame size to width of 44 and height of 44. And finally, I'm going to set the drop shadow. So dot shadow with a custom shadow with a color literal. So color lit. And it's going to use the same color as the purple here. The radius is going to be 3, x0, y3. And I'm also going to set opacity for my color. So dot opacity to 0.1. There you go. Now what I want to do is to add a text, but also a ring that is sort of inactive in the background. So we're gonna have to use a Z stack for this. I'm gonna command click on the circle, embed in VStack, and then change VStack to ZStack. Then I'm gonna put a circle parentheses in the background. This is going to be a simple one, so dot stroke, and I'm gonna set both the color and the style, color dot black dot opacity to 0.1. The style is going to be stroke style parentheses, and we're only gonna put the line width column, and I'm gonna set it to 5 as well. Then I'm gonna set a frame, so dot frame parentheses width 44, height 44. Now we have this nice inactive ring in the background. We're just gonna add some text on top, so I'm going to add a new element on top of circle. I'm gonna put text parentheses quotes 82% dot font dot sub headline, and then I'm gonna add a bold, so font weight dot bold. So that's it. We managed to recreate the Apple Watch rings with a progress, and we managed to learn quite a bit about the stroke options, including the line width, cap, line join, and dash options. And then we learn about the trimming, as well as using rotation as well as 3D effect to create a rotation plus symmetry. In the next session, I want to show you how to create a component for the ring view and make it customizable, scalable, and to reuse it at multiple places, such as here, here, and here. So I'll see you in the next session. Hi, welcome back to the 22nd section of the SwiftUI course. Today we're going to make this ring view into a fully customizable and scalable component. The goal here is to make the size, the colors, even the progress into customizable values. So let's go ahead and declare some variables before the body. We're going to start with color1. So var color1 is equal color lit. And here we have the first color. Let's set the second color. So var color2 is equal to color literal. And we're going to set the first color to the same one, so red. And this one for the second color is going to be purple. Next, we're going to set the size. So var width is equal to 44. Then var height is equal to 44. Finally, we're going to set the percentage. So var percent is equal to 88 by default. With these 5 variables, we can start replacing our component. So let's start with the first color. I'm going to select the color and then delete, replace it by color 1. Then let's select the second color and put color 2. The same for the shadow, select the color, delete color 2. Now for the width and the height, we're gonna go to the frame of the first circle and we're gonna set it to width. But here we have an error. That's because the frame is expecting a CG float, but we're giving it an integer. So let's go up there and see what's going on. We can option click the width and you can see that this is of type integer. Now Swift is very particular about their numbers, especially for CG float and integer or double. Whenever you set a default value, it's going to automatically detect the type of value based on its best guess. For example, you can see that the color literal is of type UI color because it knows that the color literal is of that type. As for integer versus CG float versus double, it has to do with how big the numbers can be and if they have decimals or not. For now, I would just say follow what the requirements are. So if it requires a CG float, then we can specify that this number is a CG float and not give a guess. So to specify the type, we can have colon and put it to CG float. Like this, it solves our problem. And we can do the same with the height as well. So colon CG float. And we're going to replace the height with height. We're going to do the same for the other circle. And we're going to look for the frame. So width to width and height to height. So let's resume this and see if it still works. So it does work because the defaults are the same as what we had previously. Now the question is, what happens if I set my component to a bigger size? So for example, 88 and 88, which is twice the size. Let's see how it looks like. I'm gonna have to resume every time that I change these values. I have to resume. So you can see my component is not scaling properly. So what we can do is to create a multiplier. Since we double our value, we will double the value of the stroke width as well as the font size. Now this design right here is based on a width of 44 by 44. And I need to create a multiplier that will take that into consideration. In the new line, let's declare var multiplier is equal to width divided by 44, which is the original size. But here we have a problem. It's that width is not initialized yet when we declare multiplier. So what we need to do here is to move this variable to before the z-stack instead of before the body. And if I do this, I'm going to have to return the z-stack. So you can see that in SwiftUI, you can declare a variable even inside the body as long as you return the parent container. Now I'm going to use that multiplier and multiply the line width. So multiply by multiplier. Multiply is expressed by the star sign. But here we have one last complaint, which is that this multiplier was never changed, so it should be using a let instead of a var. So we're gonna do that. So now it changed to a let. So what is the difference between let and var? Well, a var is something that you're supposed to change. So for example, for the component, we're supposed to change the color, the width and height, as well as the percentage. The multiplier itself is not really changing or manipulated. It's just using existing values and creating a formula out of it. All right, let's scale the rest, such as the other stroke width here, line width multiplied by multiplier. Feel free to use the auto completion, it's much better, especially for long words. Then the radius for the drop shadow multiplied by multiplier, the Y position, and now the font. So since we're using a dynamic type, we should actually use a number instead. So we should use system with a size. So 14 multiplied by multiplier. Next, we're going to customize the progress. So right now we're using the trim to do that, but also the text. Let's deal with the trim first. Let's see what kind of values that we need. So option click, and here it's also using a CG float. So the first step would be to go to the percent and set a value type of CG float as well. Then we're going to turn the progress, which is a percentage, into a value that is a decimal with a maximum of 1. So basically we need to set let progress is equal to percent divided by 100. So let's put progress instead of 0.2. Resume this, and then notice that we have the opposite. Remember that 0.2 is equal to 80%. Well, we're gonna have to do 1 minus and then the value. Since multiplication is taking priority, this is equivalent to having parentheses as well. Either way, it's gonna work. And you can see now that if I set to 88%, then I have 88%. If I was to set 44, you're gonna see that this will be reflected. The last part is to change the text. First of all, let me just delete this extra space, and I'm gonna go here and replace the number 82 inside the quotes. Instead, I'm gonna write / parentheses and type %. Let's resume this, and now the number should be reflected. But here, since I'm using a CG float, and CG float likes to have decimals, so we're gonna have to turn this into an integer instead. So in parentheses at the beginning and the end of %. So this will make sure that I don't have decimals. All right, so we managed to create a customizable component, which I think is pretty cool, because you can see that if I'm using 22% with a different width, let's say 300 by 300, everything should be scaling properly along with the content itself. So we managed to scale the line width, the drop shadow, we made the frame customizable, we made the progress dynamic based on the % number, and we changed that using a formula. And finally, we allowed for 2 gradient colors from top right to top left. So feel free to play with this. As you can see, it's quite dynamic, and we're gonna be able to use this in our UI anywhere with all the customizations. So in the next session, I wanna show you how to use that in different parts of the app, and also how to animate this little ring. So I'll see you in the next session. Hi, and welcome to the 23rd session of the SwiftUI course. In this session, we're going to learn how to animate this progress ring here, but also how to bind that outside of the component and implement it in multiple places. Let's begin with a simple state. We're gonna do state var show is equal to true by default. That's because regardless if you want to animate or not, we want to be able to show the full progress. The part that we're going to animate is the progress here, so using the trim. So we're gonna do show question mark. If it is true, then show the full progress, otherwise show 1, which is equivalent to no progress at all. Then we're gonna test with some untap gesture just to see how it's gonna look like. So using the text, we're going to add .untap gesture, and we're gonna toggle it. So self.show.toggle. All right, so we can resume this. Now it's simply going to toggle the states. We just need to add the animation to the trim. So we're gonna put it right here on the second circle. So dot animation dot ease in out. So this should have some animation going on. It's pretty cool. If we want to use this animation outside so that it's controlled from outside, we're gonna have to use a binding instead. So I'm gonna replace state by binding, and binding is going to be of type Boolean instead of having a default value. And since we need it for the preview, so we need to have a default value for the preview, we're going to use selecting the bool type dot constant and set it to true by default. Setting this here is only necessary when you have a preview. Now I can start implementing my ring inside of the content view. So I'm going to switch to content-view.swift, and I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom of the page to find bottom card view. This is what's going to control the bottom card. Let me just play this to show you where I'm going to implement the ring. So right here. In the bottom card, we have this rectangle, which is this little handle here, as well as the text. So we're going to add after the text a ring view, and we're going to set parentheses, and we're going to select with all of the options. So this one right here, and we're going to set color lit, as well as this one, color literal. Width is going to be 88. Height 88, percentage, let's say 78. For the show, we're gonna set dot constant to true for now. All right, so for the first color, we're gonna set to light blue, and the second color is going to be dark blue. So let's see how it's going to look like. So this is what I have. And now I'm going to set the animation. In this case, I'm going to use the state for which when I'm opening this card. What this means is that when my card is not showing, then also my ring view state is going to be false. And when the card shows, then this will switch to true. And that's going to happen using binding. So for the bottom card view, I don't have any state or binding at the moment, so I'm gonna create one. Binding var show of type Boolean. I'm going to pass this binding to my ring view. So selecting a dot constant true, we're gonna delete this and replace it by $show. Finally, I'm going to connect the binding from outside the bottom card view where I use this component. So let me scroll to the top first, and I'm gonna find bottom card view, and I'm going to bring the missing binding, which is right here, and I'm gonna connect that to $show card. So let's test this. And here I can barely see the animation, but it is there. I just want to be able to add some delay to the animation. So let me scroll down at the bottom of content-view.swift, and right after the ring view, I'm going to add a modifier .animation. Since I want to use multiple options for my animation, I'm going to have to use the value type. So animation dot ease in out dot delay 0.3, let's say. Now let's see if this works. It doesn't seem to be working, and that's because our component has an animation modifier that has priority. So we're gonna go to the component, jump to definition, and we're gonna scroll to the second circle to find the animation. And you can see that we already have an animation property here. So the way that SwiftUI works in terms of modifiers, especially for animation, when you set to a parent container this animation, it's going to apply to all its children. But if you set a specific animation to one of his children, then it's going to take priority over the one that is set at the parent level. So let me delete this one. And then we're going to jump back to content view. And now this as a parent animation should be applying to all of the children of ring view. And therefore it should have the 0.3 delay. And that's pretty neat, right? Because you can control the animation from outside of the component. Therefore, this delay along with the timing of the animation is completely in context of where you're using your ring view. All right, so let's do the rest of the UI, including this one as well as here. First, I'm going to put this ring view inside an HStack so that I can put the card on the right side. Let me start with the text. So text, parentheses, SwiftUI. I'm going to set the font weight to bold. And then a second text, but first I'm going to put inside a VStack. Now for the second text, text, parentheses, 12 of 12 sections, completed. Then I can put manually a second line of text inside the quotes by doing /n for enter. And I'm gonna type 10 hours spent so far. For the second text, I'm going to add a modifier called .font, .footnote, and then .foreground is going to be .gray. Finally, the line spacing is going to change a little bit, so line spacing 4. Let me center this a little bit and preview it. Now I can see that this is what I have, so I'm gonna have to customize my VStack. Let's start with a padding of 20. Let's indent this and add a .background, color .white. Then .corner radius, set it to 20. And then a drop shadow, so .shadow. The color is going to be color.black, .opacity, 0.2. Radius is going to be 20, x 0, y 10. For the alignment of the content inside the VStack, I'm going to command click this, go to inspector, set the alignment to the left and the spacing to 8, enter. All right, so this should be pretty good. Let's take a look. We're just missing a bit of spacing between these two elements. So we're gonna go to the HStack, command click on it, show inspector, add a spacing of 20, enter. Good. Lastly, we're gonna implement this little UI here using multiple ring views. So let's head to homeview.swift. And let's go to right after this HStack here, before the scroll view for these cards. We're gonna start with the first ring view. So ring view, parentheses, let's find our options. And I'm gonna quickly set the color literal, color lit. The width is going to be 44 and the height is going to be 44. Percent, let's say 68. Boolean, since we're not really animating this here, we're gonna do constant, set it to true by default. Again, feel free to use your own content. You don't have to follow me, especially for the percentage as well as the colors. For the first color, I'm going to set to, let's say, purple and then light blue. Now I'm going to create a card surrounding this content. So I'm going to put this inside an HStack because I'm going to have some text on the right side. So let's command click ring view, embed in HStack. Let's style our card first. So padding, parentheses 8. The background is going to be color.white. Corner radius, we're gonna set it to 20. Then we're gonna add a double shadow. So dot shadow, color dot black dot opacity 0.2, radius 20, x0, y20. I can just copy and paste this shadow modifier, and for the second shadow I'm gonna set to opacity 0.1, radius is going to be 1, and y is going to be 1. Alright, so we can just add some text to the right side of the ring view. We're gonna start with the text, so text, parentheses, quotes, 6 minute left. The font, so dot font, parentheses, is going to be sub headline. And I'm gonna add font weight, so dot font weight, it's going to be dot bold. Let me put this text into a VStack first so that I can add a second text. So after putting this inside a VStack, I'm going to add another text, parentheses, quotes, watched 10 minutes today, and after that dot font, parentheses, dot caption. For this VStack, let's command click it, inspector, left align it, and set the spacing to 4. Almost done. Let's command click HStack, inspector, set the spacing of 12. Voila. So you can see that some of these styles are pretty repetitive, such as the drop shadow, the clip shape. At some point, you're gonna want to create some sort of a system, like having a modifier that includes a bunch of them, such as the double shadow. Or if you're using a custom font and you don't want to repeat the same modifier over and over. So that's exactly what we're gonna learn in the next session. We're going to learn how to reuse custom modifiers and how to set up a custom font. I think you're going to find the next session really useful. I'll see you then. Hi, and welcome to the 24th session of the SwiftUI course. Today we're going to learn how to create sort of components of modifiers so that we don't have to recreate those styles from scratch over and over again. So for example, the double shadow here can be reused without having to retype all of this code. So this is very similar to having a style guide in CSS. But of course, since it's SwiftUI, we have a lot more power. And we'll also learn how to use custom fonts that we downloaded, let's say from Google Fonts, and then set that as a reusable modifier. So let's open the navigator and let's right click ring view, new file. We're going to create a SwiftUI view called modifiers, create. And then I'm going to disable my navigator. So here I'm going to delete all the code right after import SwiftUI. Then I'm going to create a new modifier. So here I'm going to type struct shadow modifier of type view modifier, curly braces, then func body, parentheses, content of type content. I'm going to return some view, curly braces. Then I'm gonna use content and I will apply the modifiers to the content. So this code is very similar to how you would create a new view. So I'm gonna go back to home view, which is right here, and I'm gonna find whatever modifiers that I want to reuse. So for example, I'm gonna scroll a little bit to find the 6 minutes with the ring view. And here, for this specific card, I'm using a double drop shadow. So maybe I want to reuse this. So I'm gonna cut this, which means that if I resume this, it's not gonna appear anymore. There you go. And now I'm gonna go back to my modifiers right here, and I'm gonna paste that after content. So that's it. That's how you would create a reusable modifier. Now going back to home view, I'm going to use that. So dot modifier parentheses, and I'm going to put the name of the modifier, which is shadow modifier parentheses, and voila. And this is the equivalent of writing those 2 lines of code. And of course, you can add more modifiers for this single custom modifier. Another great use case for custom modifiers is for fonts. So we're going to start by trying to replicate this, but using a completely different font every time. So let's head back to modifiers. And now we're going to create a new one for font. So struct font modifier of type view modifier, curly braces, func body, parentheses, content colon, content. Then we're gonna return, so arrow some view, curly braces. Now we're gonna modify the content, so content, and then on another line, dot font. We're gonna use the system font, so dot system. And here we're going to use the one option with text style and design because we want to use a different system font. For the text style, let's set it to body. And for design, we're going to set to another style, which is either rounded, serif, or monospace. We're going to use rounded. Now let's head back to home view and let's apply that font modifier. But first, let's resume this. And also because we want to use a custom modifier here, we're going to have to reset the fonts. So I'm just going to delete those modifiers. One thing that is interesting to note is that font modifiers can also work on a VStack, and it will automatically apply to all of the children. So if I decide to apply modifier, and it's going to be the font modifier that I just created, parentheses, you will see that it will automatically apply body as well as rounded to both of these text elements. Now the problem is our font modifier has a dot body set by default, and we cannot change it at the moment, except that these texts, they need a different text size. So what I'm gonna do is to go back to modifier, and I'm going to make the font style customizable. So I'm gonna go before the body and declare a new variable. Let's type var style is going to be of type font dot text style, and we're gonna set the default so that it's optional, so dot body by default. So now I can use this style variable and replace dot body right here, so style. Now let's go back again to home view, and this is where we're gonna customize these text elements. On the first text, I'm gonna set a dot modifier, font modifier, parentheses, and here I have the option to change the style as well. Let's set dot sub headline for the first one, and I'm just going to copy this modifier to the second one, and for the second one I'm going to set dot caption instead. Let me resume this. So sometimes, especially for modifiers, you're going to need to do Command B to build it so that you can see the changes applying. You can also do Shift, Command, and K to clean your build, and then Command B to build again, and then make sure to resume it afterwards. So this is what we have so far. I didn't have to specify if it's a rounded font or not. It's all part of my modifier. Keep in mind that if you want to make the first text bold, you're going to have to set the boldness before the font modifier and not after. So I'm gonna set, let's say, dot bold parentheses, and that will apply the bold to your text. And thanks to these modifiers, I can just customize the font from here, and it's going to apply to all of them at the same time. So here, let's say I want to set serif instead. I'm going to go back to home view and then build and then resume. And both of these texts are using serif now. So that's how you set up a font modifier with a variable. Now let's just put it back to default instead of serif. So default here. And now I'm gonna show you how to set a custom font. You can find free fonts on Google Fonts at fonts.google.com, and I'm gonna search for work son. And so this is the one I'm gonna use. I'm going to add it and then click here. Then I'm going to click on download. Once it's downloaded, I'm going to open the navigator, and this is where I'm going to drag and drop the file to, let's say, next to assets. And here you're going to have to click on copy items if needed, create groups, add to target, and then finish. By the way, there's a guide on apple.com in case you run into problems. But essentially the next part is that you're going to have to go to info.plist, and in this file there's a little icon that is a plus. So I'm going to click on that one, and I'm going to search for fonts provided by application. And this is an array, so I'm going to have to add a bunch of them. And so I'm going to select on item 0, and for the string I'm going to double click right here and put the name of the font. I'm going to open this folder on the left side, and this is the name of the font. So if I want to use regular, it's going to be workson-regular.ttf. If you want to add more, you have to click on the plus sign, and we're gonna put the name again, so bold.ttf instead. And now I have two files that I can use for my custom fonts. Alright, so let's try to make this work. We're gonna go back to modifiers, and I'm going to disable the navigator, maximize this space. Then I'm gonna set struct custom font modifier of type view modifier, curly braces, func body, parentheses, content of type content, arrow some view, curly braces, content dot font, parentheses, and this time I'm going to use dot custom, and we have two values that we need to modify. So let's select this one first. So now we have to set the name, and basically it's the name without the .ttf. So string is quotes, and I'm going to set workson-bold. Now I have the option to set the size for my font. I'm going to set it to 28. So let's try and use this custom font. I'm going to go to home view, and I'm going to replace watching here. Let's add a new modifier. So dot modifier, I'm going to set custom font modifier, parentheses, and then I'm going to resume. And here it doesn't seem to be changing at all. So what you need to understand is that the font will take priority over the modifier, and this will essentially replace what we have in terms of font in the modifier. So let me disable this, and now you should see that we have a completely custom font. Unfortunately, I cannot customize the size by just adding a new modifier called .font. I'm going to have to do it through the actual modifier here. For example, if I wanted to set the size to be customizable, I can just declare a variable before body, so var size of type CG float, because my custom here is a CG float, and I'm gonna set a default of 28, so equal 28. So now I can replace 28 by size. So now going back to home view, I can decide to customize the font size as well instead of using a new .font modifier. So I'm gonna have to disable this one and then customize the size for my custom font modifier, and I can set to 34 or 28. So just to be clear, this font modifier will replace whatever you have in this custom font modifier. Alright, before we go, I just want to set more rings here, and also I want to make it scrollable. So let me go to the H stack here, and I'm gonna command click this H stack, embed in H stack, and right after this first card, I'm going to create a new one. But at this point, I don't want to repeat this code. I can just copy and paste this first H tag, and then I can customize the content. So for example, for the second one, I don't need the text, so I'm gonna delete the V stack. Then I'm gonna customize the content. This time it's going to be width 32, height 32%. I can just put a random number, And for the colors, I can just change to another one as well. Let's create a new one. So copy and paste this new H tag. And now we're gonna customize the content for the third one as well. Let me set it to light blue, then to light purple. And let's change the percent to 32. We're gonna add some spacing between the elements. So we're gonna go to the parent H tag, and here we can do parentheses spacing of 30. All right, so for this parent H tag, I'm going to command click it and extract subview. Let me name this to watch rings view. I'm going to make it scrollable, so command click on this new component, and let's put that inside an H tag. We can just replace the H tag by a scroll view. Since we want to make it horizontally scrollable, we're going to have to use parentheses dot horizontal, and we will hide the indicator. So shows indicator, set it to false. Let me just resume this. Let's also play it. So this is what I have so far. I need to add some padding. So let's go to watch rings view and then dot padding horizontal comma 30. To offset for the drop shadow, I'm going to do dot padding parentheses dot bottom comma 30. So as you can see, the drop shadows are quite large. So what we can do here is just jump to our component and then change the shadow modifier, which will apply to all of them at the same time. And that's kind of the purpose of those modifiers. So we're gonna go to shadow modifier, and here we can sort of customize the radius, let's say to 10, the Y to 12, and the opacity to 0.1. Let's go back to home view and then resume this. If you don't see the change, make sure to build again and then resume. Awesome, this is what we have so far. And today we learned how to create a reusable modifier and how to use them in our app. In the next session, I want to show you how to summon a new view such as the content view with the cards, and we're going to do it using an if statement instead. It's going to be very interesting. I'll see you in the next session. Hi, welcome back to a 25th session of the SwiftUI course. So today we're going to learn how to show a new view using an if statement. Now the question is, why do we need to do this? First of all, it's so much better for performance. So if you have any background animation or heavy load in the background, then you would want to use the if statement. Currently, we can show new screens in a few ways. So for example, we have the modal presentation. This of course comes with a built-in gesture. It's not exactly taking full screen as well. We also have the tab, and then we can also show new screens by hiding it from the actual canvas. And this is what we did for the menu view. But the problem with this method is that it's not scalable. So if you have like so many screens hidden and there are many animations in the background, then it would not be performant. This is definitely great for prototyping, but the if statement is going to be much better. And you do have some control over the transition. And that's exactly what I'm going to show you. All right, so before we start, I just want to fix this little extra padding that we have. Because the scroll view itself was clipping the content and we had some drop shadow. Since we cannot turn off the clipping of the scroll view, we're going to have to use offset to move everything a little bit up. So I'm going to find the scroll view, and it's right here where we have the section view. And for this scroll view, I'm going to simply type dot offset parentheses y colon minus 30. Okay, so that's fixed. Now we're going to take care of the if statement. We're going to show a new view from the home.swift file. But still sticking to home view, we have to decide what's going to trigger the event. And I could have just triggered one by one for all of these small cards here, but to save time, I'm just gonna tag it to the whole watch rings view. So I'm gonna add a new gesture. So let's add a new modifier, on tab gesture. And this is where we're gonna change our state, but we haven't created that state yet. So we're gonna go to the top of the document of homeview.swift, and we're gonna create a new binding. And the reason for the binding is because we want to organize all our views in home.swift, and we're gonna bind that to a state in home.swift. So let me type binding var show content, and this is going to be of type Boolean. And with this binding, I'm gonna go back to my watch rings view, and I'm going to set it to true when I tap it on this element. So self.showContent is equal to true. When you create a binding, you're gonna need to set a default for the previews. So we're gonna scroll down to the previews, and here we're gonna have to put the missing default for show content. And just for the preview, we're gonna set it to .constant, and we're gonna set it to false. So now that we have this binding, we can go to home.swift, and we can also put the missing binding. Again, home.swift is where we have all the screens on top of each other using a Z-stack. So home view, and then on top of home view, we have the hidden menu view, which shows on demand. And then we're also going to use the if statement right here. But first of all, let's deal with this complaint. Let's see what they're suggesting. We're gonna insert the show content, and we're gonna have to set a binding. First of all, we have to set the state. So state var show content is equal to false by default. And using that state, we're gonna bind it. So $show content, and now it should stop complaining. All right, so now that we have the event set up from home view where the user clicks on this specific element here, and we bound it to home, and we created a new state, we're gonna set the if statement. The if statement is going to be right after gesture, so right after the parentheses. And here, all I need to type is if show content, so the state, parentheses, and then show whatever view you want to show. In this case, it's content view, parentheses. That's it. That's how you would show an entirely different view by using the if statement. We're gonna play this, and when we click on this element here, it's going to show that new view with all the interactions. Of course, we have the background, which is not set, so we're gonna fix that. What we can do, since we are inside a Z-stack, so any element at that level, it's going to be on top of each other. So in this case, instead of setting a background from a content view, I'm going to set a color, and I'm going to ignore the save area. So let me type color.black, just so that you see what's going on. So when I click here, you have the background, and the background is not ignoring the save area. So what we can do here is to do .edge ignoring save area .all. And if I do this, it should take the full screen. Now that I see it, I'm gonna set it back to white, and now I have my full screen without affecting the content itself. And the last thing I want to show you today is how to create a close button on this screen, but also how to transition it even if you're using an if statement. First of all, let's create that close button. We're gonna start with a SF symbol, so image, parentheses, system, name. We're gonna set it to quote X mark. Then we're gonna set the frame to width 36, height 36. Foreground is going to be white. Background is going to be black, but the background needs to have the value type color. I'm going to set it to a circle, so .clip shape, circle, parentheses. Since this is inside the if statement, I can't see it right now while I'm designing it. So what I can do is just to cut it and paste it outside of the if statement, and then I can bring it back later. Currently you can barely see it, but it's right here in the middle. To align it to the top right, I'm gonna use the H-stack V-stack technique using the spacer. So first of all, I'm gonna set it to embed inside an H-stack first, and then I'm going to put the spacer before the image, and then I'm going to embed in a V-stack and put the spacer after the H-stack, so spacer, parentheses. Since this is not ignoring the save area, it's going to start from here. So I just need to add a little bit of offset from the top right. So on that V-stack, I'm gonna set dot offset. Using X and Y, I'm gonna set -16 for X and then 16 for Y. Perfect. Now that I'm satisfied with my close button, I'm going to bring that back inside the if statement. So select everything, including the V-stack and the offset modifier, Command X, and then put that after content view. Xcode is going to automatically indent your pasted content perfectly. And here I just need to add a gesture to be able to close that content view. So dot onTab gesture, and then self dot show content is equal to false. So this should be working. I click here and it's going to show the content view, and I can close it from this button. And of course everything is interactive, which is really nice because it's as if I'm switching to a new view. Now the only downside with the if statement is that you don't have the same control over the custom animations. So for example, if I was to set an animation using a condition here, it wouldn't work. What I need to use instead is a modifier called .transition. And here we have a bunch of preset transitions. If you type dot, then you're gonna get a bunch of transitions such as opacity, scale, slide, move, offset. Let's try and use .move, and here is simply going to move back and forth from one of the edges. So let's say .top, and then let's not forget to add the animation. So .animation, we're gonna set this one to .spring using the response, damping, and blend. Let's set to 0.6, 0.8, and 0 for blend. So it's going to take care of that transition for us. And not only that, but also the out transition. But unfortunately, the out transition is being masked by the bottom content. So if I was to scroll back up and hide both the colors as well as the background, so these elements are the ones that are being in the way of that transition. So if I test it again, click here, there's an in transition, and close, now there's an out transition as well. I haven't found a solution for this, and maybe SwiftUI has still yet to mature in terms of the if statement, but the bottom content is the source of that problem. So I'm just gonna put back the color and the background color for the home view as well as for the bottom background, and then go back. For now, what I can say is that the transition will only work if you don't have a background or any element that will be hiding the outro animation. Otherwise, if you don't want to have any transition and just have an instant show of a new content, then this is perfect for you. So that's how you show a new view using the if statement. This is great for performance. But if you're prototyping and your views in the background are not heavy, don't use background animations, then you don't need to use the if statement. All right, before we finish, I just want to set this gradient in the background first, and also this little UI so that we have a full home UI before moving on to the next phase. In home.swift, let me scroll at the very top. I'm going to replace the background color white. And here I can put any content that I want. So I'm just gonna put that in a new line, and I'm gonna set a linear gradient using Shift Command and L. I'm going to search for views, linear, and I'm going to set the colors. This gradient is going to start from dot top to dot bottom. And for the two colors, let me double click first. The first color is going to be parentheses, quotes, background 2. The second color is going to be dot white. Now, if you notice, our background gradient has a height of 200. So we're going to set a frame modifier on that linear gradient with a height of 200. The problem now is that it's in the middle, so we're going to set it inside a V-stack and use a spacer to push to the top. For the remaining space, we're going to set a background modifier of color.white for the V-stack. Great, so now we have that gradient of 200 with a white background. I'm also going to set some bottom UI, so I'm going to go to Home View, scroll a little bit right after the scroll view, before the spacer. Here I'm going to add a title, so text, parentheses, quotes, courses. I'm going to set a font modifier, parentheses dot title. Then to add bold, I can also do dot bold parentheses. Let me align this to the left, so embed in HStack. And after the text, I'm going to set a spacer, parentheses. I want to push the content a little bit with a padding of 30, so dot padding on the HStack, dot leading, comma, 30. Now I want to add a new card at the bottom using exactly this UI that I already created, but I want to make it slightly bigger. So what I need to do is to use the section view and make the width and the height customizable. So let me command click the section view, jump to definition, and I'm going to make the width and height customizable. So let's set var width of type CG float is equal to 275 by default. Var height CG float of type is equal to 275 as well. Using these numbers, I'm going to replace the frame so that they can be customizable. So width is equal to width, height is equal to height. Since these are defaults, I don't have to specify them here, but I can choose to specify them after the course's title. So let's summon it. Right after the HStack, I'm going to set section view parentheses, and here I have a bunch of values. So section, I'm going to use the array that already exists. It's going to be section data, square brackets. I'm going to do index 2, so the third record in my array. The width, I'm going to set it to a custom size. It's going to be screen.width minus 60. And the height is going to be 275. Since I changed my component, I have to resume my preview. And voila, I have my custom size card using the section view component. Now that I have my content taking more than the height of the screen, I'm going to have to use a scroll view. So let me scroll back up at the very top. So the parent VStack here, I'm going to command click it and embed in a VStack. Instead of the VStack, I'm going to rename this to scroll view. And just like that, I'm able to scroll the content. Some last minute polish, I can move the content by using offset. So let me scroll down a little bit to find my HStack that has a title. I'm going to also set an offset. So let me copy this modifier and add that after the padding. Let me set it to minus 60 and do the same for my section view. So minus 60 as well. Sometimes, especially when your project gets bigger, it doesn't refresh perfectly. So you just need to edit your code a little bit and it's going to try to refresh again. And now it's fixed. Okay, so this is what we have so far. I think it's looking pretty similar to what we have in the design. One thing to note is that the menu view here is not going to work from the home view because it's bound to the home.swift. And the home.swift is what controls a new menu view that is hidden, but also the show content that we just set up in this session. So if you do it from home.swift, then the menu view animation should work perfectly, and then the show content using the if statement should work. So now our app is starting to look like a real one with multiple screens, such as the notifications, the menu using a custom animation, and then the content view using all the gestures that we have set up. I think this is pretty cool. So the next UI that we're going to build is going to be a big one. We're going to create a fully custom transition that goes from this card and then takes on a full screen mode. And we're going to learn a bunch of really cool new techniques. I'll see you in the next session. Hey again, welcome to the 26th session of the SwiftUI course. This is going to be a long one because we're going to learn how to create a very custom transition, and we're going to be able to open back and forth these cards, and it's all taking into consideration the scroll position, and we can also set some dismiss animation using blur and a lot of cool animation techniques and custom data for each card. Okay, so back to Xcode. Let's create a new file. Right click on Home View and New File, SwiftUI View. We're going to name this one Course List. From here, I'm going to hide the navigator and then resume. I'm going to start by building the card from scratch again. So we're going to change the text to SwiftUI Advanced. Let's set a font modifier to .system. The size is going to be 24. The weight is going to be .bold, and we can delete the design. We're going to command click the text, embed in VStack so that we can create another text underneath. So text, parentheses, quotes, 20 sections. Let's align our text. So command click on the VStack, go to inspector, left align, and also add a spacing of 8. Press enter and then go back. Let's add a logo to the right. So we're going to embed this in the H stack first. And for the logo, we're going to use the image literal. It's easier to prototype. So image parentheses UI image written in camel case. And for the UI image, we're going to set image literal. And you can definitely use the auto completion for this. And make sure to close your parentheses. And I'm going to set to the logo. The logo is going to be aligned to the top, so I'm going to go to the inspector and set it to alignment top. Now we can set the parent container by command clicking the H stack and put that inside a V stack. And then after the H stack, we can use another image literal. So image parentheses UI image. Let's select the auto completion, set image lit. And then we're going to select one of the images. So let's say this one. Now we're going to create a frame. So dot frame, the width is going to be screen dot width minus 60 so that we have a space of 30 on each side since it's centered by default, comma, height is going to be 280. After the frame, we're going to set the background color, and the background color, we're going to set color parentheses color lit so we can have some color literal. It's easy to change the color. Let's set to purple. Fix the indentation. I'm going to also set clip shape rounded rectangle so that we have smooth corners using corner radius of 30 and style continuous. Let's also add a shadow. So shadow with a custom color. So color parentheses color lit, and you can set the same color for the drop shadow. And after the parentheses, we're going to set a opacity of 0.3. The radius is going to be 20, x 0, y 20. Now we're going to add a padding to pretty much everything. So we're going to do that before the frame. So dot padding, parentheses, we're going to set a padding of 20. Because we don't have enough space in our frame and the image is taking way too much space, we're going to have to make this image resizable. So resizable modifier. Let's make sure to have the aspect ratio to dot fit. And let's set a frame. The max width is going to be dot infinity, so the maximum possible. Then we're going to set another frame modifier since we cannot mix max width as well as width. So dot frame parentheses height of 140, and we're going to align the content to dot top. Now the content is not taking enough space. It's taking a minimum space possible. So we're going to use the spacer to take the maximum space possible. So I'm going to add a spacer between the V-stack and the first logo. So spacer here. And I'm going to add another spacer between the big image as well as the top H-stack. So spacer here as well. Since our background is a little bit dark for the black text, we're gonna set the text to white instead. So let's add a new foreground modifier and set dot white. For the second text, we're gonna set the foreground color as well. I'm gonna set dot white, but I also wanna add opacity. But when we have multiple options, we have to specify the color, so the value type. And then you can put dot opacity as well. Set it to 0.7. It's starting to look pretty good. Now I want to create a component out of this card. And to do that, I have to have a parent container. So I'm going to command click the VStack, embed it in VStack. And then on the child VStack, so the second VStack, I'm going to create the component by selecting extract subview. This is going to be called course view. Whenever you create a component, you're gonna have to resume the preview. And now let's focus on the component itself to create some basic animation. So here, I'm going to create a state. So state var show is equal to false by default. And also when you change variables, we're gonna have to resume every time as well. Anything that is for the layout doesn't need to refresh. But when you change the states and the variables, then you need to resume. So let me set a tap gesture to add my interaction. So after shadow, I'm going to add dot tap gesture and I'm going to change the state. So self dot show dot toggle. For the animation, it's going to be very basic. This card is going to turn into a full screen. So to do that, we just need to change the frame. Let's go to frame, and right before screen.width -60, we're gonna set show question mark set to screen.width, otherwise screen.width -60. Then for the height, I'm gonna set show question mark screen.height, otherwise 280. Let's play our preview and you can see that it's working. And here we just need to add our animation, and I like to do that before the gesture. So right after shadow, I'm gonna set dot animation, and I'm gonna set dot spring 0.5 for the response, 0.6 for the damping, and the blend is going to be 0. Now we're gonna have our animation. Now you can see that we have a little bit of a weird offset here. What I found was that there's a better way to write this code. So instead of using width and height, we can use max width and max height. So let me comment this and do dot frame parentheses max width colon show question mark dot infinity, so take the full width, otherwise set it to screen width -60. The same for max height, so colon max height colon show question mark dot infinity, so take the full height, otherwise set it to 280. This is going to ensure to take the full width and height when show is set to true. But of course, .infinity respects the save area. So if you want to take the full screen, we're going to have to add another modifier, .ignore save area .all. And if you do this, then it should be aligned perfectly. Let me fix this indentation and also fix the padding for the text when it is in full screen mode. First of all, for the padding, we can set a bigger padding in full screen mode. So for that padding modifier, set show ? Set it to 30, if not 20. Then add another extra padding from the top. So .padding, parentheses, .top, comma, show ? Set to 30 extra, otherwise set it to 0. So when we're in full screen, we have an extra 30 padding for the text, as well as 10 extra padding on all sides because it was 20 before. This is what we have so far. Obviously, it's going to get a lot more complex when we have content underneath, when we're going to have to deal with scrolling and offset. So in the next session, I want to show you how to have another content underneath and animate that as well. I promise it's going to get really interesting. I'll see you soon. Hi, and welcome back to the 27th session of the SwiftUI course. Today we're going to continue our animation, except that this time we're going to make the card smaller and we're going to have some extra content underneath, and we're going to be able to dismiss that animation using the close button. So starting from the course list.swift, we're going to jump to the course view component, and this is where we left off. Currently we have a single VStack that is our cover right here. So what we're going to do is to embed this VStack inside a ZStack so that we can have more content underneath that card here. So I'm going to change this VStack to ZStack. Since the content is going to be underneath, I'm going to put that before the VStack and I'm going to add some text. So let's put the text element, parentheses, quotes. And here I'm just going to take the text from the layout. So I'm going to copy that inside the quotes. Then from this first text element, I'm going to embed in a VStack, then add a new text, parentheses, quotes, and I'm going to put about this course, and this is going to be a title. So .font, .title. And I'm going to make this bold, so .bold, parentheses. Let me add more content, so I'm just going to copy and paste the first text and paste over 2 times, and then replace these texts with new ones from the design as well. Feel free to use your own text, and from here I can just set the spacing by going to the inspector, set the spacing to 30, and I'm going to align everything to the left. Finally, we're going to add a padding of 30. Now with this ZStack, we have 2 big elements. First, the content that is text underneath, and then the main card that is at the top. So what you can do with ZStack is to set the alignment, because the alignment works between components. So depending on which one is the biggest, it's going to take that alignment against the biggest component. So I'm going to set parentheses alignment colon, set it to top. So this is going to make sure that we're aligning everything to the top against the biggest component. And thanks to this, it's going to be very useful for this full screen mode because we want everything to be aligned to the top. But when it's inactive, we want to keep it in the middle. So we're going to have to set a frame. Right after padding, I'm going to set .frame parentheses. Then I'm going to set max width colon show ? .infinity. Otherwise, set it to screen .width -60, just like the card. Let's also set max height, so comma max height colon show ? .infinity. Otherwise, set it to 280 with an alignment to top. So if you test this, it seems to be fine. The problem is there's no animation for this one. We have set the animation for the other VStack, which is the card. So what you can do here is to move the animation modifier to the parent container instead. So the next one. And I'm also going to move the save area ignoring like this. Now it's pretty seamless. There's an animation. The only issue is that the card is taking the whole space. Therefore, we don't see the content underneath. So we're gonna have to change the max height for the card. And instead of putting to infinity, which is the whole height of the screen, we're gonna set it to 460, just like in the design. So now we have this animation that is fully working. We're almost there. We just need to add a little bit of offset for the text content. Let's go to the first VStack, and right after frame, I'm going to set dot offset parentheses y colon show, set it to 460, otherwise 0. So now we have the text content that is taking into consideration the size of the cover. I would also like for the background UI to have a bit of drop shadow, therefore it's going to need to have a white background. And then I want to clip to the same shape as the card. So let me scroll down a little bit, and then we're gonna add a background modifier, color.white. We're gonna use the same smooth corners, so dot clip shape, rounded rectangle, parentheses, corner radius of 30, and the style continuous. Then I'm gonna add a bit of drop shadow, so dot shadow. The color is going to be color.black.opacity. Set it to 0.2, radius 20, x0, y20. Perfect. So now you can see that our transition is really smooth. One last thing that you can do is to add an opacity animation as well. So let's add dot opacity and show question mark set to 1 if set to true, and then else set to 0. Perfect. Now the last thing we want to do is to transition from this logo to a close button. So let me go to the logo, which is right here, and I'm going to put this inside a Z stack. So first it's going to be a V stack, and I'm going to change that to a Z stack. And for that logo, I'm going to set dot opacity and set show question mark to 0, otherwise set it to 1. This is going to make it disappear when you are in full screen. At the same time, I'm going to create a close button and make it appear in full screen. So let's start with the SF symbol, image, system name. It's going to be of string xmark. I'm going to set dot font, parentheses dot system. It's going to have a size of 16, weight of dot medium, and we can omit the design. So we're going to delete it. I'm going to set it to white. So foreground color dot white. Let's put this image inside a VStack, and the VStack is going to have a frame of width 36, height 36. Background, set it to color.black. Then clip shape, set it to circle, parentheses. Finally, set the opacity. I'm gonna set the animation, so show question mark, set it to 1, otherwise 0. And voila, this logo is transitioning to a close button. So using the Z stack as well as opacity, as well as frame, we managed to create a very smooth animation to full screen, and it's really smooth. In the next session, we're gonna have multiple cards and scrolling, and we're gonna keep the same beautiful transition for each of those cards. I'll see you in the next session. Hey, what's up? Welcome back to the 28th session of the SwiftUI course. Today we're going to learn how to take this UI animation here and make it work with multiple cards and with scroll. The first thing we're going to do is to command click on the VStack and embed that inside another VStack, and then we're going to change from VStack to a scroll view. And what you're noticing here is that the scroll view is going to take a minimum space available. So to fix this, we simply need to set the VStack inside, so the content, and we're gonna set a frame. So dot frame, the width to screen dot width. Now this should solve it for the iPhone 11 Pro. Now, since this is inside the scroll view and the scroll view is not ignoring the save area, you're gonna see this gap here, and we're gonna deal with that later. Let's go ahead and see what's going to happen if I use two of these course view components. So I'm just gonna copy and paste a second one. And now you can see that each of them will try to maximize, but within the VStack space that they have. So we're gonna have to deal with the other cards by using offset to fill this gap. First of all, let me just add a spacing between those cards. So spacing of 30 for the VStack. And now we have some spacing here. And now I'm going to use the geometry reader to detect the scroll position of every single card and then use that space, that gap here, to offset it so that we have our full screen for each card. So let's command click on the second one and embed in VStack. And instead of VStack, we're going to change that to geometry reader. We're going to get a value called geometry back, so geometry in. And here the geometry reader needs to know the size of that container, which is why you cannot click outside of some of this space here. So we're going to have to set the frame. So dot frame, I'm going to set the height to 280. And then another frame, set the max width to dot infinity. Now this should be all clickable, and it's really hard to see, so sometimes you have to stop the preview so that you can see this outline, and now you see that it's taking this space. If you were to not have the frame, you're gonna see that it's only taking the space from here, which is why only this zone was clickable. So I'm just gonna put back these frames. Another interesting thing about the geometry reader is that it doesn't seem to be centering the object inside if your frame is bigger than the content. So we're gonna have to deal with this problem with the padding later. Okay, so let's play again, and we're gonna click, and we can see that it's always constraining to this size of the geometry reader. We're gonna need to get the state from the course view component so that when we are at full screen, we should also change the frame of the geometry reader. But first of all, we're gonna have to go to the component itself and set the binding. So we're gonna change from state to binding. And we cannot have a default. We're gonna have to set of type bool. Then from here, we're gonna scroll to the top and then set a state from course list. So state var show is equal to false by default. And we're gonna have to pass that to each instance of course view. So show colon and then $sign show. We're gonna have to do the same for the other component. Except for this one, we're gonna have to add self because we are inside a geometry reader. Cool. With all of those changes in place, we're gonna have to resume our preview and then test the app. So what's happening is that regardless if you're tapping on this card or the other card, it's going to change the state for all of them at the same time because we have just bound to a single state called show at the root level. Later on, I'm going to show you how to fix this using data and a loop, but for now we can do it manually by setting a second state. So state var show2 is equal to false, and we can use show2 instead for the second card. Again, resume the preview, and you're going to be able to have a different state for each of these cards. All right, using the new state, I'm going to set the height. So show to question mark. If this is true, we're going to set it to screen.height. Otherwise, we're going to set it to 280. So with this, it should fix the height of my container on full screen. And we just need to fix the offset now. So to do that, I'm going to go to course view, and I'm going to add a new modifier called .offset, and parentheses. We're going to change the Y position, colon, self.show2. So if this is in full screen, then if it is, then we're going to use the min Y position. So the positioning from here to here. In order to do that, we're going to set minus geometry, which is the value that we're getting, dot frame in coordinate space, and that one is going to be dot global. And here at the end of the first parentheses, we're going to set dot min y. So min y is the position of the top. And then finally, we're going to set the else from the show to, and we're going to set it to 0. So what this means is that, okay, is the card 2 in full screen? If yes, I'm just going to use the min y position, and I'm going to use negative min y to offset it so that we're filling that gap, and this should start from here instead. And then else, then don't change anything. So set the offset y to 0. So let's take a look, and voila, this is working perfectly. And on top of that, because I'm using the offset and I'm calculating the position, I don't even need to set the ignore safe area because it's considering the top of the screen to this part, so the min y of the card. And now what remains is to fix the padding issue. So we're going to go to the max width. Right now it's set to the full width, which is using infinity. But what we can do is set show to question mark. And if it is in full screen mode, then set dot infinity, that's fine. But otherwise, we're going to set screen dot width minus 60. What minus 60 means is that we're taking into consideration the 30 padding from the left and the right, which is 60. And then now that space for the geometry reader is set to the actual size of the card. Since the geometry reader now is taking the actual size of the card, it is being centered within the VStack. So that's why now it's properly aligned and centered with the proper padding. And when we do our full screen animation, you can see that everything is working perfectly. So in the next session, I want to show you how to replace these manual states and use data instead, so that we can loop through any number of cards that we want, and we can just store those states and don't have to create these manually every single time. So I hope to see you in the next session.